Thanks for coming, everybody. This is a tremendous turnout. When you're doing something like this, something crazy, changing the Constitution, trying to make democracy better, driving around the state. I think we drove 3,000 something miles last month, doing our town hall tour. And each one, you never know what you're going to walk into or who's going to show up. This one we had you register in advance, so I had a good idea. Some of you were coming, but thanks for actually showing up, because that's the part that's never certain. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Andy Moore. I'm the executive director for People Not Politicians, and you are here presumably for an ambassador training. Is anyone not here for that? Okay, good. I don't know what to tell you, but that's right. Here for the bagels, right? I smelled fresh bagels, and so. Well, thanks for being on this crazy journey with us so far. Also, can you guys hear me okay? There's no mic in here, so I've got to project, and I stayed up too late. I feel tired, but coffee will help. So I wanted to kind of walk you through what to expect today, so you have an idea. First, introductions. Hi, my name is Andy. That's pretty much it. I do want to introduce some of our team that are in the back. Crystal Yosef, back here. Crystal is part of our communications team. Jennifer Monies in the middle. Maggie Leftwich, and Katrina Ward. The first three are kind of all comms. We all do everything, right? Because that's how you win. And so they all have, I could go into their specialties, but you'll figure it out as we go along. Katrina will be taking photos as well, and I'm videoing this. I know people who couldn't make it asked if we're going to video it. I am. We'll see how it turns out and whether or not we'll share it, but that's, at least there's a camera rolling over in the corner. Please don't flip it off or anything like that. Then I have to edit it, and it's a whole thing, right? So what we're doing today is what we've called a ambassador training. Messenger training is also true. But what we need is more than just me, right? More than just the few of us who are able to work on the campaign. We need all of you to help be ambassadors for this effort, right? Like, if we're going to end gerrymandering in the state, if we're going up against the powers that be, who are very angry about this, then it takes us demonstrating that this really is a movement by the people of Oklahoma. And you guys all know it is. That's why you're here on a Saturday morning, bright and early. But having you out there and being able to, we can do one training with me, but we can do like 30 trainings if we all do it, right? And I've joked this is like I'd like to follow the model of the church, right? Like, you go to Sunday church, right? And there's a guy up front usually that's waving his arms, kind of like this. And then like on Sunday night or Wednesday night or whenever, then there's all these house churches across the community. So we're trying to spread the gospel of redistricting, I guess, across the state. Don't read too much into that. But the reason this is important is that we've done polling, we've kind of put the time in to do the research to find out what words and phrases resonate more effectively with the audience, right? And I think we all recognize there are different audiences out there. Each of you know your audience, your network of friends and family and neighbors and whomever. And so please, feel free to kind of speak to your audience. But we want to present up front, like, these are the messages that we know work, right? These are the things that move people from on the fence to definitely support. These are the messages that will chip away at whatever. Hey, man. I always love a room where there's a door by the front, because everyone comes in like, I'm just sorry. But we also know like what messages work against us, and we'll talk through some of that. At some of our town hall meetings, we had spies like that show up and try to video. I'm like, it's a public meeting, you can video it if you want, but I'm not going to say anything secret. Like, we filed a ballot petition, let's talk about it. But there's lots of questions, and I get that this issue can be made complicated, and that's a tactic, right, for our opposition. It's like, well, if we can make it too complicated, people won't vote for it, which is true, right? And so the truth is, it's not that complicated. Like, it's about people, not politicians. They shouldn't draw their own lines. End of story. we have to figure out how to say that 1,100 different ways so that we can tell it to everybody across the state. So you guys all have an agenda you picked up in the back, I'm sure. Kind of that plan for today is this presentation we'll do up front. We blocked out 3 hours. It won't go that long unless you guys are super engaged, in which case, fine, but I'm leaving at noon, so I have to go to Tulsa and do this again. So I'll kind of go through some of the messaging and stuff with you for a little bit, and then we'll do like a Q&A with some of our team will come up here, just so you guys have a chance to ask whatever other questions we didn't address. Because I know you have them, and I can't possibly anticipate everything, and that's cool. I want this to be a dialogue and interactive. I always hate when presenters say, this is going to be an interactive session, and you're like, I don't want to interact. That portion is later, so you can drink some coffee and like feel comfortable with your neighbors. And then the second half of this is a little bit more about you guys. So we'll break into groups, and I want everyone to have a chance to ask and answer some questions in a safe space, right? And I'm a therapist, so this is kind of my wheelhouse. But and the first question we'll go through in the opposition, right, is like, is this funded by Obama and Eric Holder? No. That's the answer. It's no. And it's easy to say that in your head until someone's looking you in the eye and saying, is this funded by Obama? And you're like, I like him. He seems like a nice guy. And so just want the chance to have that conversation, right? And it's different. Once you do it, it's easier, no matter what. How many of you guys have ever, I know many of you have canvassed, got petitions from people before? Raise your hand if you've carried a petition. All right, great. How many of you have knocked doors for a candidate or some kind of campaign before? Right. The first time you did that, were you nervous? How many of you were nervous? Yeah. I knocked doors for the first time last year, and I was very confident. It was a very safe place. It was a get out the vote, reminding people that they already knew were supporters to show up, and I still was like, hi, I'm here about politics, and no one likes being that person. And so I get that it's difficult. You guys are already way more experienced than most people, and so that's why you're here, again, on a Saturday morning to talk about this. So we'll do the practice, and then at the end, whatever closing remarks we have. Housekeeping issues. I assume there's bathrooms down the hall, right? Everyone's gesturing this way, so just... Oh, excellent. Signage. And a quick note of just thanks to the Better Business Bureau for making this space available for rent at a reasonable price. It's hard to find a space for 50 people on a Saturday morning that's not $300 or something, right? And also one that comes equipped with its own screens and all that stuff. So, and a fancy blue wall, which I think, isn't this the color of the year for next year? Pretty close? Some kind of regular blue or whatever they called it. Okay. All right, so to kind of start, I just want to kind of set, not really the ground rules, but set, I think, to know where to stand and where I operate from with this and where I hope that you do too. And this isn't in the polling, this is Andy's take on this, but this is what I believe works, right? Being honest, which is always a good place to be. Because if we're honest, then that forces the opposition to not be. Because if they're honest about it, they'd be on our side. And so just calling a spade and saying, this is what we're doing, this is what we're not doing. There's no pretense about it. This is not a coup, despite what you read in the papers. So being real, this is about people. And it's tough, several, I think, the day before we launched, Jan from the League of Women Voters back here and Rebecca, who's also here, we all had a meeting with Saxum, our communications firm, to do kind of training about this in advance of filing, because we knew the media is going to be there and asking questions. And I even got in my own head, and Jennifer was asking me questions, and I was it was all jerky, and I couldn't answer. And I realized I'm trying to be someone I'm not. I was like, okay, come on, ask me again. And let's just say what I know to be true, right? Is this funded by Obama? No. Who are you? It's a bunch of people, man. It's just a bunch of Oklahomans who are sick of this, and we're trying to fix it. It's not that hard. And so just being honest, being real, To the extent you can, be encouraging, right? This is really optimistic work, and I'm an optimist as a general place of operation, but being encouraging people to say, we can do this. And when we've done these town halls, a lot of folks have been like, well, good luck to you, because it's going to be tough. It is tough. One of our consultants said the other day, it's just going to feel like we're losing for the next year. We're not. It's just going to feel that way. I was like, well, I'd rather operate from a position that I'm afraid we're losing, because then I'm going to work harder, right, than to get comfortable on it. But it's important that I think we are encouraging to each other and to anyone you talk to. You say, like, this is legitimately making our democracy better. And that is very encouraging, especially in these trying times. Be patient, because the election, we don't even know where we're at yet. So at any point, there's delays. Right now, we're waiting for the Supreme Court to pick a hearing date for us. We've been waiting for several weeks. This is kind of unusual. I'm impatient with that. Everyone asks me, I'm like, I don't know. I can't control the courts, which is fine. But there's going to be times that I think we all feel impatient. Also, for me, when someone is talking in opposition to me and trying to push back, and whether it's out of a place of genuine concern or just out of a place of like partisan bias or anything, I'm impatient for them to stop talking so I can refute what they're saying, right? And the therapist in me would tell you that 9 times out of 10, people just want you to listen to them a little bit, right? And you don't have to give space for someone to like spout, lies on a big audience. That's fine. But what I found is if you just say, okay, that's a genuine concern, because maybe it is. I'm not here to judge if it's a real concern or not. Thanks for your concern. And then go back to being encouraging and being honest and kind of lead into it. This isn't, if we try to battle, man, we're all going to get exhausted, right? Like we can't fight for the next 350 days or however long it is. I have a countdown clock in my office of how many days to the election. So, and then finally, be kind. This is advice that I try to give to everybody. My dad is here. He gave me this advice many years ago. Just said, be kinder than necessary. I forget what that was about, but I find it applies to everything. So just be kind. Again, the other side's going to try to be ugly and angry and entrenched in their ways, which is exactly what we're trying to stop, right? Like they are entrenched in there. We've been doing gerrymandering for 120 years. That doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, right? Like our country's done a lot of things for a long time that was not right. At some point, you got to be like, okay, well, now let's just change it and move forward with a better world. So a quick overview. I know many of you have come to some of our town hall meetings or have heard about what we're doing. I'm not going to go through the whole slide deck explaining the policy. If you have those questions, I'm happy to answer later or as we go along. Or you can go online and read the policy for yourself and then email me and I'll help sort things out. But a quick overview of kind of where we're at and what we're doing, who we are. We are people, not politicians. You may have guessed that by the title and the cover of your thing. But legitimately, we're not. Like, I don't... A lot of people said, oh, Andy's got aspirations. He's going to run. I'm like, not the way current. Like, a year ago, I had no idea I'd be here. I don't know what happens after this. But for the next year of my life, this is it. And for you all, like, this is about us. It's not the Andy Moore show. It's not the Greg Treat show or anybody else. Like, this is about people, right? This is about Oklahomans fixing the system that has been broken for way too long. And that's it. It's not about outside interests. It's just about people, not politicians. What we're doing, we're trying to end gerrymandering in Oklahoma. That's a really easy thing to say. We'll come back to that several times today. Why we're doing it. So this is not the bread and butter, meat and potatoes. Maybe this is the real heart of the issue. You can see the vegetarians in the room. We're like, well, mostly potatoes. Why are we doing this? Because politicians shouldn't get to draw their own districts or pick their own voters, which is essentially what gerrymandering allows, and that politicians have rigged the system so they aren't accountable to voters. That's why we're doing this. And I think what we've found, and I struggle with this all the time, is that the thing that moves people, and the reason that you guys are concerned, is not the what or the how, like the nuts and bolts of the policy. It's the why, right? And so it is easy. It's easy for me. It may be easy for you to like get dragged into questions about the policy, and we will talk some this morning about how to talk about the policy, and the preview of that is do what you can, but you don't have to be experts, right? Like the issue is why, and the why behind this. I could have listed a whole slide of bullet points, but when politicians have the power to gerrymander, to draw their own districts, pick their own voters, by the very practice of doing that, they are not accountable to voters anymore, right? Like when they draw it so that they know that just enough people will show up and check the top box for their party and go home, then they don't really have to listen to us. We have, I've got the data, like a significant majority of our state legislature seats, people don't have an opponent in the primary, and even more don't have an opponent in the general election, right? Like, and we see this in turnout, right? We had MAPS vote and only 40,000 people showed up last week to vote. It's not always, I mean, there's apathy as a part of it. There's just a general like disconnection. And if we're gonna win this, we've got to have people like reconnected, even if it's about this one issue, right? I was in Tulsa yesterday, talking to some people, and there's a guy who all but said, I haven't had a cause for several years, but this has got me back in. And I was like, come on in. He wants to raise money for us too. I was like, well, you can come all the way in. Please, you're an attorney? Great, call your friends. But the why is what's important. So as we go through this morning, as you begin to think about how you will talk about what we're doing to your friends, I know they'll say, well, how does this work and how many whatever, you know, learn it as best you can, know it, but know where you can refer people and tell them, like, not that the what is not important, but it is not as important as the why. And the why we're doing this is that politicians need to be accountable to voters. We need to have fair districts. They shouldn't draw their own districts, right? Does anyone think politicians should draw their own districts? You're probably not here if you do, but all right, so a quick update. As you all know, we filed the ballot petition on October 28th. That started a window period. People could challenge us, and we got a challenge, 2 challenges, which we expected more or less. One challenge was to the language of the gist, which is like the language on the top of the signature page. So once we get to go collect signatures, there's all the lines at the top. You have to have a summary, right? Well, what's the gist of it? And they said, well, this gist isn't comprehensive enough. And our response basically is like, yeah, it's just the gist of it. We can't, the policy's 14 pages, we can't, and the whole thing is the policy's attached to it. So if someone's like reads this and it's like, I don't understand, well, just turn the page and read the whole policy. So I'm confident we'll get through that one. That's a typical challenge. The other challenges were to the constitutionality of it, which is the purpose of this challenge period. So they challenged the constitutionality on 2 grounds. One, they said that it violates the state's single subject rule. Again, this is what every challenge is about. Their specific angle is a decent one. They're saying because our proposal addresses congressional redistricting as well as state legislative redistricting, that's 2 things. And in many states it is, and they cited states, but those states have 2 separate processes for how they do it, right? Like it's like one board for this and another board for this. In Oklahoma, it's been the legislature doing both anyway, and we're just replacing them with people instead of politicians. So it's the same. And arguably, if they tried to break down this on single subject, then every other law we have that has 2 paragraphs or more would be split. So I'm not worried about that. And then the other thing they challenged, they said this violates voters, your First Amendment rights, specifically because it has like a cooling off period or doesn't allow certain people to serve on the commission. For example, legislators' spouses have to wait 5 years, just like legislators do, right? But there are lots of boards and commissions, like the Ethics Commission has cooling off periods and rules about this. In fact, the Ethics Commission has been proposing an additional cooling off period so that legislators have to wait before they can become lobbyists for this very reason. There's lots of examples of that, so that's a bad argument too. So we're waiting. We submitted our responses. Our attorney was excellent. You can go. It's all online. If you go to the Supreme Court Network website, you can look it up. And I enjoyed reading it. I don't know if you like reading legal filings, but there was one part that our attorney just said, "This is ridiculous," and I was like, "I didn't know you could just say that." It was much. I mean, it was. That was the whole sentence. So now we're just waiting for the courts to set the hearing date. Normally they do that up front, but they didn't with this because the governor was appointing a new justice to the state Supreme Court. He's on board now. It seems like some other things, like the Medicaid campaign, found out that they got a date for their second challenge period. The criminal justice campaign found out they don't have a challenge, so they get to go ahead. So there's some news trickling out of the courts. So I'm hoping like maybe Monday we'll get an email. I don't know how they do it. Hoping our attorney will find out and tell me that we've got a hearing date. That hearing, it's not a court case. It's just a 1-hour hearing where they listen to both sides and then they make a ruling. We don't know when they're going to do it. They're on their own timetable. Could be before the holidays. They might want to wrap it all up before Christmas. They might want to just wait until after Christmas. I don't know. So we're back to being patient, right? We're just kind of hanging out. But we're not going to stop. Like, we're just going to keep doing our campaign. What we've been planning on is sometime in January or February is when we'll be able to start signature collection. That's been my plan since May. So far, I feel rather prescient that that's on my calendar on the wall. Like, we're on track. So we're just waiting for that. And then once we do that, we'll do signature collection and we'll be off to the races. So that's a quick status update on where we're at. So back to the messaging. The 3 things that I want you to have drilled into your head or absorbed into your psyche is who we are. We're people, not politicians. And everything that means, right? We are teachers. We are social workers. We are, media professionals. We are firefighters. We are IT people. We are homemakers. We are brothers and sisters and grandmas and spouses and whatever else, right? Dog lovers, cat lovers. Good for you. Whatever, bird people, whatever it is, we are Oklahomans. And honestly, like, our coalition we've been building is people across the political spectrum. This is one of those issues that doesn't matter if you're right, left, center, out back, whatever. Most people agree that the system we have is not working and that we should do something differently. And that, heaven forbid, I don't care what party they're with, politicians have a huge conflict of interest if they're drawing their own districts. Like, that alone rubs people the wrong way. What we're doing is we're ending gerrymandering. That's it. Now, the thing we'll get to in a second is that a whole lot of folks don't know what gerrymandering is, right? Like, it's a term. They're like, I've heard that. Yes. Tell me again what that is. So we'll get to that in a second. And then why we're doing it. Again, this is the why. So who we are, what we're doing, and why we're doing it. And as quickly as you can move through that, that's your elevator pitch, right? And so if you want to go home and write out a little paragraph and practice in front of your mirror or your dog or your bird or whatever, that's totally fine. I would be lying if I didn't drive around in my car and like practice these things. Like, I'm like, oh, I have an idea of how I can say this differently, and I'll just say it in the car to myself. These days, everyone thinks you're talking on your Bluetooth anyway, so it doesn't look so crazy. So we'll go through those 3 things. Who we are. We're a coalition of concerned Oklahomans who want to end gerrymandering. Again, it's whenever you can, the simpler you make it, the better. It doesn't have to be complicated. We are a coalition of concerned Oklahomans who want to end gerrymandering. Does anyone disagree with that? Great. I mean, we're definitely a coalition. We're definitely concerned. We're definitely Oklahomans. Check. Great. That's easy. We're just regular people. This is not, and so you have to think about what we're not. This is not a coup. This is not a bunch of out-of-state liberals. Any out-of-state liberals here? You all look like Oklahomans. That's right. I was born in Texas. So we are nonpartisan. We were in McAllister a few weeks ago, and the venue we were at was this restaurant-y meeting place, and there was a VFW dinner thing going on that we just walked into the middle of, and we were in the side room, but a lot of them came over, and again, I don't know everyone's political leans, but there was a guy with I guess a Keep America Great Again hat, not MAGA, but the new hat. older guy, and he came in, and he sat there and talked to him, and he was on board too, right? And it was someone that you could see other people in the room like eyeing each other, like, and it was this. We had some Pittsburgh County Democrats there. We had, a guy that was the former commander for the not the VFW, but the whatever the thing is. Yeah, it was one of those. I've had a specific thing, and it'll come to me in a second when I have more coffee. But he was an independent, and he came in. He's like, "What's this all about?" And I started. He's like, "Is this about food stamps? Because that's my deal." And he went off on that. And I said no. And so I listened to him. I was patient. I listened to him. And I said, "Okay." And I said, "That's I get that. Here's what we're talking about. We're talking about gerrymandering." And he was like, "Oh yeah, this is not good." He's like, "Well, can I sit down?" "Yeah, please do." And so he sat and listened. And so we have some really interesting photographs that Katrina took where we've got, people who we know are like, we have a Democrat who has run campaigns. We've got this independent veteran, and then this older guy that was there with the county Republican Party that was kind of come as to scope us out and film it and ask prying questions. And we have a picture of all three of them laughing together. And I was like, see? That's right. They may not want us to tag them on Facebook, but that's what we're doing. That's right. We're just regular people. So wherever it is, this is the truth, and this is how we're going to win. We are nonpartisan, or you can say bipartisan, or omnipartisan, or post-partisan. No one knows what those words are. Everyone kind of knows nonpartisan. And the point is, this is not a partisan issue. Gerrymandering is not a partisan issue. It is a power issue. I don't care which party you are. There are Democrats right now in Illinois fighting against this. Oregon, same thing. They're trying to stop gerrymandering in those states. And whichever party's in power doesn't want it. In Virginia, their process to get a measure on the ballot is they have to pass the same law through their state legislature twice in 2 different years, and then it goes to the ballot in the 3rd year, right? So in order for the people to vote on it, the politicians have to vote twice. Well, right now, they're dealing with this issue, and they've got an interesting reflection point where the Republicans had the majority, and the Democrats pushed and pushed, and they passed it. And then there was an election last month, and the Democrats now have the majority, and they're like, well, hang on. Maybe we don't need to go so far as a commission. And, people like me are like, listen, jerks, you can't flip-flop like that. That's exactly why we need commissions, is because clearly it's in your best interest until it's not, and then you're like, well, we'll back off. And that, I think, highlights man, that's exactly what we're talking about. In Oklahoma, Democrats did it for 100 years. A unnamed politician said this week at an event that no one cared about this in Oklahoma until Republicans had the majority. I was like, baloney. I was reading the Oklahomans archives the other night, and Governor Bellman filed a ballot initiative himself, State Question 556, I think, because the Democrats gerrymandered our congressional districts so bad, because the Democrats were in power in the legislature, and so he filed a ballot initiative in challenge of that. And I was like, people have cared for a long time. Reading the op-eds from 1991, 1981, when they were dealing with this, were very similar to the op-eds we have now, the things that people are writing. In fact, I used some of their language because I was like, that's a good point. I'm going to say that again. So this has been around for a long time. We just know about it now because we all have social media and we talk about it more. And also, he doesn't want to change it, so he's going to say whatever he can to cast doubt in the eyes of the public. It's up to us to stand there and be truthful and simple and patient with the process. And so we also care about things like fair and free elections and doing what's right and holding politicians accountable to voters. I know that there's a bunch of politicians who also care about this, right? And we're not saying that politicians are not people. Someone asked me about that. I was like, no, they're clearly people. We're not anti-politician, we're anti-gerrymandering, right? The name is convenient and has good alliteration. That's why we chose it. But this is something we all care about. And what we've seen in other states that have already passed this measure is that these kinds of arguments work, right? Appealing to people's sense of what's right and fair. We all want fair and free elections. We all want the semblance that at least our democracy has some credibility. And there's a lot of fear about that on both sides of the aisle. So just saying, listen, this Do you care about these things? Great, so do I. Let's talk about how to get there. So back to that question of what is gerrymandering, which is usually the first question. You say, we want to end gerrymandering. They're like, great, what is that? So remember, most people may not know. It's a term they may have heard in 8th grade. They've since forgotten what it is, and so it's up to us to kind of remind them. And certainly when you talk about redistricting, most people have maybe never heard of that. People know about the census, and that's a good connection. Like every 10 years we do the census, right? Yes. The next year, we use that data to redraw all of our voting districts, however you want to say it. People are like, oh, okay. But you didn't know that. I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me. Okay, well, right now, the politicians get to draw their own districts. And that's the point everyone goes, what? Indeed. So a simple explanation is best. Gerrymandering is a little trick the politicians use to keep themselves in office. I know some folks have said, I don't like the word trick. Okay, well, don't use it. I will say that the polling says this is a good way to phrase it because no one likes to be tricked. And most people think on some level, politicians are in the business of tricking us, right? So it has like a self-evidency there. And it's also tricky because it's behind the scenes. We don't see it. It's often done in a, dark, smoke-filled room in a downtown hotel or something. So whenever you can, we found it really helpful to use pictures of districts. If you guys have been to our town hall tours, you've seen them. We will be sharing. Katrina has drawn 101 state districts. She does graphic design, and so we'll start putting those out on social media. We're looking at doing like 100 districts in 100 days or something like in the new year to highlight. Out of the 149 districts, there's 100 of them that are just a little squirrely, right? And so, and going around places, I mean, here in Oklahoma City, in the Plaza District over on 16th, it's divided right down the middle of 16th. And if you've been there, that might make sense in some places, but the Plaza District is distinctly a space. Now that has evolved over the last 10 years, right? So maybe 10 years ago it made a little more sense, but I don't know how to like divide up like Bad Granny's store from Empire Slice House across the street. Like even my kids know this is all the Plaza District. And so things like that where we can highlight like the districts are drawn right now to divide communities, not to reflect where we live. And so those kinds of things that are very obvious and people resonate with is helpful. When we get to signature collection down the road, we will help you out with this. One of our plans is to tape pictures of districts on the back of the clipboard, right? They did this in Michigan. I think in Michigan they had people like made clipboards in the shape of some districts, which is tough to write on sometimes because you're like, sorry, that's you. Yeah, just really long clipboards, they're real skinny. So I think those kinds of things are the tools we can use. Just because a district looks crazy doesn't mean it's necessarily gerrymandered, but everyone's like, oh, right, I've seen that. Like, and that's the touch point everyone kind of resonates with. So if it's possible to use that, and please, anything we put on social media, if you are on Facebook or Twitter or one of those things, please share it or take a screenshot and send it to your grandma or whatever you want to do. That would be great. So the next thing is, once you've explained what gerrymandering is, we talk about how to end it.
Can you ask a question now?
Sure, Dad.
How many states have already passed this type of legislation?
Sure.
How many are pending?
Good question, and lots of nods with that. So there are 14 states that have some form of independent board or commission. There's probably 14 different ways they've done it. So another question we often get asked is this modeled after another state? No. Ours will be legitimately the best. Ours will be I think the first truly independent commission, which is pretty cool, I think. A lot of states have a similar one, but they had to strike some kind of compromise and allow the legislature to appoint a couple of people and erode the independence of the commission. And I talked to a legislator. It was like, well, why don't we have some kind of appointee? Why didn't you talk to us? And I said, because I don't want to. Because that's whatever we do to compromise that compromises the integrity of what we're trying to do. So 14 states, it is most similar. There are like kind of best practices, right? And so the 4 that passed last year are the closest. Michigan did one, Missouri, Utah, and Colorado. Of those, I think Michigan's probably the most similar in how it's constructed. There's obviously some tweaks to how they recruit people and all of that, but it's pretty similar. All of them kind of vary in size. Some are 11 people, some are 9, some are 15. And that's kind of up to what fits each state best. And this legitimately is a plan, a solution for Oklahoma. An Oklahoma plan, right? Like we love saying that. Because this is a way to reflect who our state is without it being too big. You guys have all done group work, right, on committees, and it's difficult. What's the old joke? A camel is a horse designed by a committee, right? We don't want that. We just want a commission that works for us. So the second part, how many states is this pending in? I've heard there's 8 or 9 states, including us, that are looking at this for 2020. Off the top of my head, Virginia, Arkansas. Now I'm blanking on the other ones. No, there's already passed. We have like a whole document about this. But anyway, there's 8 or 9. Alaska maybe is one of them. So a bunch of states are looking at this. And this is not necessarily like people are like, oh, this is all a nationwide effort. You're all in cahoots. I'm like, no. Last year, the Supreme Court just basically said, we're not going to rule on this issue. It's up to the states. And so we are, right? Like this has been an issue percolating across the board. And once the Supreme Court heard those cases finally, I mean, they were pending for a couple of years, and they said, we're not going to rule on this. It's up to y'all. Then all these states got involved, right? Some states started last year. Some states are starting this year. At the end of 2020, though, when we all win, almost half of the states will have moved over to this. And that's around the tipping point where you start seeing like stuff change at the federal level, right? Like once it gets there, then a bunch of other states start falling in line. So also, it's important now because 2021 is when we do it. And so if we don't get it done now, we can still pass it in 2023, but it won't matter until 2031. And so if we want to nip it in the bud before they have a chance to gerrymander one more time, even worse. So, question?
Since the ice has been broken, I'm asking.
Yeah, we'll pause for questions. That's fine.
What districts are included in this law, and specifically are county commissioner districts included?
Right. So, no to that. This is just the congressional districts and the state legislative districts. The county stuff gets a little tricky for when there's 77 counties, and it varies a bunch in there. So yeah, just congressional districts and state legislative districts. Any other questions before I go on? Super. All right. So how do we stop it? We take the politicians out of it. That was nice. Is it
Tweet I need to send out at night.
right. When a brief aside, because my coffee's kicking in. I used to teach at Southern Nazarene, my alma mater up here in Bethany, and I was teaching a freshman psychology class, and this guy's phone rang, and this is back when it was all the little Nokia, beep, 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 beep. But his was Big Pimpin' by Jay-Z. And I mean, it was loud and just silenced the class, and I just looked at him like, really? That's... Here at SNU, with that, and you. And he, turned several shades of red, and I was like, we'll just move on. And so, at least it wasn't that, Kayla. So yeah, if the problem of gerrymandering is done by politicians, then the solution is to take the politicians out of it, right? Like, they shouldn't have the power to draw their own districts. That power should go back to the people. That's the most fair way to do it. Yeah. Pick up your pitchforks in the back. We'll meet you outside. We should, so how do we stop it? So if we take the power away from the politicians, we give it back to the people, and we create an independent redistricting commission. And that, you see people kind of glaze over at that. That's a lot of kind of bureaucratic ease, right? And so you can kind of explain what that means. That's if it's not the politicians, it's the people, and it should be a commission of folks that represent the whole state, who are independent, just citizens, who are not politicians or lobbyists or elected, those things. It should be just regular folks. And that's it. I mean, again, I'm trying to keep this simple and straightforward. This is how we talk about it. So a note about talking about the policy. So usually people start asking now, and we'll get into how are they selected and who can be served and who can't. And that's all spelled out in there, and I'm happy to kind of give you some more specific instructions on that. We put some of it in your little guide there, but we also tried to keep this pretty simple. On our website, peoplenotpoliticians.org, if you go to the resources tab, you can read the full policy. It's not that complicated. Everyone, once they read it, they're like, oh, this seems really reasonable. I'm like, right. It is funny to me when I see politicians try to argue against this, and they've said things on the news. It was like not true. And in fact, there was, after we first filed, I was doing a thing on News 9, and just before me, one of our state legislators was doing his thing, and we were talking ahead of that, and he did it, and he was like, see, that wasn't so bad. And I said, except for all the things that were not true. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I'm concerned you haven't actually read the policy, because you said this, and that's distinctly not what it says. And he was like, but that's the case. So this goes back to what I said earlier, like being honest and truthful. Like the truth will set you free. Like this is in there, and if anyone contests it, you're like, just read it, man. Like it's out there. This is a public document we're proposing to put in our Constitution, and I don't do that lightly. It's well thought out. People smarter than me. I didn't sit at home and write this myself. Like it's scholars and people who do this for a living. So talking about the policy, keep it simple. Again, don't get ahead of your skis. Don't feel compelled to be a policy expert. We're not asking anyone to be a policy expert. I am not a policy expert. So answer if you know what the answer is, but also don't feel compelled to answer. It's okay to say, I'm not 100% sure on that. Let me look it up for you. Or why don't you can go read it on their website. You can go look it up and read it as well to answer those questions. Now, I encourage you all to read as much as you want, and if you want to try to commit it to memory, good for you. But that's not an expectation that I have, certainly.
Just say, here's Andy Moore's cell phone number.
That's true, yeah. I'm going to change that. Yesterday, was it yesterday? No, Wednesday, Katrina and I and Joe were going to Tulsa for a meeting, and she got in the car, and I was on the phone with a guy, not about this, but I also the director for Freedom of Information Oklahoma, which cares about Open Records Act, Open Meeting Act, and general government transparency. And some guy got my number and called with some very elaborate questions about a city council and what they can do with zoning and I was like, man, this is way beyond what I know about. And so I just had it on mute, and she was like, oh, sorry. I was like, no, just get in. I'm just listening too. I don't know what this guy's talking about. All right, so a little bit of policy stuff, just because this is kind of the highlights, right? Who's on the commission? Well, it's 9 people, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, 3 independents. Now, I will say, as an aside, the actual policy doesn't use those words, right? It says 3 people affiliated with the state's largest party, 3 affiliated with the next largest party, and 3 who are not affiliated with either party. Because in 100 years, who knows what the parties would be called, right? Like, presumably not like the Whigs and the Tories or anything, but that's, when you're explaining to people, that's how we know, right? Otherwise, they tune out pretty quickly. So kind of 3 of each. Or you can say 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and 3 everybody else. And that's it. And people are like, what about libertarians? That's everybody else. What about Green Party? They're not a recognized party, but that's everybody else. And, that's it. And then there are the criteria. And this is the piece that if you're going to learn something, I think this is one of the things that's helpful to kind of commit to memory, right? That you have to be registered to vote, you have to be a resident of the state, and you have to be registered with the same party for 4 and 5 years. So but it has to be someone. We don't want carpetbaggers from Colorado coming in trying to draw our districts. That wouldn't happen, but let's just say it did. And then commissioners can't be politicians, can't be lobbyists, can't be people that work for politicians or lobbyists, or their spouses, because we don't want someone, or their immediate family. We don't want someone's son, daughter, spouse to come in and gerrymander for them, right? But only for 5 years. It's just we're not saying you can't ever do it. We would run out of people in this state. But we can just say, like, when you have just been in office, you can't do it for a few years because people will gerrymander for their buddies. That's all this kind of good old boy system. We're trying to put the kibosh on that. Likewise, if you serve on the commission, you can't then run for that office or run for a office in that anything. Like if you could be city council and you could be on the commission because you're not running for those districts that were drawn that way. We're just trying to keep the conflict of interest out. It's pretty simple. I know it's easy for me because I've said this stuff like a bajillion times already, but you too can practice and get it. So how are they selected? This is the other point of question that we get, and we have like mapped this out on whiteboards, and so far this is the simplest way we've figured out to describe it. This is the point people, I think initially, you know, Jennifer, it strikes me that we were concerned people would be confused about this early on, and it has not been a point of confusion as much as maybe we explain it really well. So basically, it's like a 3-step process, 4-step process. The first step is everyone applies, right? Thousands of people apply, and all those applications have to go, someone's got to read them and sort out the sheep from the wolves and the good from the bad, right? And so there's a panel of retired Supreme Court justices who screen all the applicants, and they sort them, weed out the bad ones, and then they take the top 60 best ones and they sort them into 3 buckets. 20 Republicans, 20 Democrats, 20 independents, or everybody else. So, yeah, maybe there's thousands of people who apply. Someone's got to read all that, and it goes down, and they sort it out. In the policy, there are criteria about how they screen them, right? They try to pick people. They pick people who have an ability to build consensus, who are fair, who have experience with map making, or have experience with like nonprofits and politics and advocacy, and kind of get the system. They can't be lobbyists and the things we talked about. And you're looking for people who are good, right? So people who maybe know what's up and have the ability to represent our state and to be geographically representative and all that. So again, I encourage you to read the policy. You can kind of see all of that and figure out how to phrase that piece. In my experience, most folks haven't really asked that. I mean, the people we've had that have asked these very specific questions are people who care about very specific things. People like you all who would show up on a Saturday morning or a Wednesday night for a town hall and are highly engaged. But when you're talking to your friends, they may not ask. You're like, listen, everyone applies and they get sorted into 3 buckets: Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and from there, they're randomly selected. So they draw names out of a hat from each of those buckets. 3, 3, and 3, that makes 9. Ta-da, that's the commission. So there's the important takeaway too is that there's no appointment piece. No one is saying you are on the commission. They're saying at best like, well, you and 19 other really qualified applicants are in this bucket, and then I'm going to swish my hand around and draw out names, and maybe it's you. That's how it works. So there's no direct appointment piece. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any diversity
Mm-hmm.
element to that?
Mm-hmm.
How is it?
In the circle step, the vetting or the screening, the panel is instructed in the policy to select applicants who have like geographic diversity across the state, right? Like represent all congressional districts around the state. People who reflect the state's, I think we say diversity, and it lists several criteria. It's like race and ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, veteran status, maybe something else. Yes, yeah. Like we went through, I think whatever whatever the post office lists as like their diversity criteria for applicants. That seems like a fair organization. We kind of used that. So yeah, there's no like quotas. It's not like it must be one person from this and one person there, because that stuff's going to change over time, and those quota systems are highly contentious and rarely work the way they're supposed to for this kind of thing. but there is a nod for that.
How are the retired justices chosen?
Ah, good question. So the justices are also randomly selected. So the Chief Justice says, hey, everyone who's retired, who wants to serve on this panel? And it's not just the Supreme Court, it's the appellate level. So it's Supreme Court, Court of Criminal Appeals, Court of Civil Appeals. But most people don't know we even have those, so I just say Supreme Court. I'm not trying to mislead them, I'm just trying to let's cut to the chase here. So any of those retired justices who are interested say, yes, I'm willing, and then they just draw 3 out. So again, like the Chief Justice doesn't appoint anybody, those justices don't appoint anybody. There's no appointment necessary. I just thought of that. Nice. All right. Good question. So that's kind of how we talk about ourselves, right? So we go about this, and again, to go back, reference what we said earlier. We try to say things that are very simple, approachable. Just say how it is, right? If you're not sure, then ask questions. Yes, ma'am.
You may be going to address this later, but how long will this commission be together, and how often will the districts be redrawn?
Yeah, good question. Could you guys all hear the question? Okay. So districts are drawn every 10 years. So 2021, 2031, 2041, and that is laid out in the U.S. Constitution, so we can't fiddle with that. The commission is only together for just a few months. It's just for the purposes of drawing the districts right now, and then they're dissolved, and then 10 years later we pick new people, right? So that way, if someone's who's in office now wants to serve down the road, maybe they could, right? Like, there's some former officials that I think would be great, have lots to offer. If you guys know Joe Dorman, I guarantee Joe Dorman would jump at the opportunity to be on this. I don't think he can, because I think he's registered as a lobbyist right now, but for his job. But Joe is like a good governance guy, and I could see him being like, "Ooh, I would be all about this." But he may have to wait, and it's a lot of politicians leave office and become lobbyists, and they'll be like, "Well, but I want to serve on the commission." I'm like, well, then get a real job. I don't know what to tell you. Like, that's not, but that doesn't always work out. Like, we all have to make compromises in life. Like, I want to travel a lot, but that's not the way life works. So, all right, so I kind of want to pivot into those opposition messages, what we're hearing against us. Let's make these slides black to make them sinister, but that's a little silly. So we'll kind of go through them quickly, and then we'll take a deeper dive into each one. So we hear that this is a redistricting coup by out-of-state liberals, specifically Barack Obama, Eric Holder, George Soros came up once already, and I was like, I don't think he exists. Is he a real person? I've never seen a picture of him. I just hear his name. That people will say this is just the urban areas trying to take power away from rural areas, or trying to take votes or representation away, which I think is a compelling argument. This is the one that has been the most troubling to me, because I have a lot of friends in rural areas, and I get it. Like, there's a lot that goes into that. That this just gives all the power to activist judges. In the last few weeks, this is the one we've heard the most from the politicians, of like, oh, those liberal judges. Like, the liberal judges that you all approved and appointed? Okay. And then this just gives power to unelected commissions or unelected bureaucrats, otherwise known as regular people. So those are kind of the main ones we've heard, and we'll go through each one. Are you associated with Obama? No. I think we're done here. That's it. Now, it is true. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. I have a question about this, but I can wait until you're done.
Maybe I'll answer. Okay, I'll come back to you, Terry. Now, it is true that Obama, Eric Holder this issue, stopping gerrymandering, is the thing they care about, and they are working in some states, I think more in like the legal aspect of helping defend lawsuits. I'm not sure. So that it's not a good look for us that like they're out there doing it, but just because it's happening doesn't mean that there's any communication. So there's no affiliation with them. They don't call me secretly and give me strategy tips. No funding, nothing. So they've, this is a concern I've raised, like, what happens if they call? And everyone's like, you tell them no, right? And honestly, like, we don't want money from either party. again, this is about people, not politicians. And not to say that anyone necessarily has bad intent, but we certainly don't want to plant that seed of idea that someone might be trying to conspire behind the scenes. This is about us. It's not about out-of-state liberals, conservatives, carpet salesmen, anybody. So this is a grassroots effort by Oklahomans and for Oklahomans. I mean, we've honestly raised thousands of dollars from hundreds of people, many of you in this room, and I appreciate it. If you'd like to donate, we have envelopes in the back. You can sign up on there. That would be great. But we're doing this. Now, I'm trying to turn over every stone I can for money, whether it's from you or attorneys in Tulsa or anybody else, except not Obama. And not whoever the Republicans have Scott Walker, former governor of Wisconsin. They're basically trying to keep gerrymandering, I guess, in states. They're kind of fighting at that level. I don't want either one here, right? If one comes, they both come, and then we've lost it, and that's not what we want. So they're out. Terry.
But the petition effort is funded not only by individual donors, correct?
So we have some institutional help. We've got some people that have pledged money to do a match and that kind of thing, but
Is it possible is that information transparent?
it will be. So that's a good question. So we get questions about are you going to release the names of your funders and put that stuff out? And yes, we have to report everything to the Ethics Commission, but there's not a mechanism to do that until we're on the ballot. So right now, People Not Politicians is a 501c4 nonprofit organization, right? So not a charity, but a regular nonprofit where things aren't tax deductible, because that's the appropriate legal structure. And then for right now, and we have to wait until we get signatures and we get put on the ballot, and at that point we have to reform as a campaign committee, I think is what it's called, and I forget the 50 whatever, but a campaign committee. And at that point, then there's a mechanism to report to the Ethics Commission, and we have to report everything
So
back.
At some point we'll have to.
Yeah, everything.
Are there any questionable, is there anything people should wonder about? It's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
Where money-
No, I'm not worried, and I'm making a point to not, people are like, have you asked so-and-so? I'm like, nope, we're not going to ask them. So,
And then, but there are partners, aren't there?
yeah, so I think at some point, right, when this
I
is,
guess the league is just part of the.
yeah, the League of Women Voters is, a big part of that. And there are big groups out there, other nonprofit organizations that are nationwide that are supporting this, and they've been working in other states, and I'm talking to them. I think having them on our team is helpful both from fundraising, because, we need $5 million to win this deal. And I don't know about your pocketbooks, but I can't write that check. It's well, if I got $1.50 from every man, woman, and child in the state, then maybe we could win. So I think there's some other strategic partners out there that we're courting. And sometimes it's organizations, associations that might be able to help sponsor. And so we're working on that. And again, all of that will be disclosed when it has to be disclosed. Yeah. For you guys, though, if someone asks you that, be like, I'm just a volunteer. I'm not doing the budget. And say, we'll report everything when we have to, which is true. People are like, why don't you do it now? It's because there's not a way. The Ethics Commission cannot, receive information from every nonprofit and put it out there. For one, the Ethics Commission keeps being defunded by the legislature, and so they can barely tread water. But, so that's a good question. Any other questions about that?
What if it's an anonymous gift? How does that happen? Because that could be.
If there's an anonymous gift of $1 million, that would be suspicious. That hasn't come up too much. I will ask our attorney and our compliance person. Do you know about this?
Fairly certain that we're not allowed to accept it.
Yeah.
You can't take it, the campaign itself can't take it.
Right.
You have to fill out the card.
Yeah, and put all that stuff on there. Because we had someone gave us $1, $1 at an event. It's all I've got in my wallet, and we were like, crap, what do I do with this now? And so I think Joe still has it on his dresser. We've got a couple of cash things. We try to get him to fill out an envelope so we can report all of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say that, I guess the concern about who is funding all has to do with a concern about influence. So once we make it clear that, of course, we looked into what other people were doing to put this petition together, but we created the petition.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And when, someone else asked me about this. Well, no, take it back. I was asking questions of like, okay, so let's say I go to some big association, right, and we get, $50,000 from a union or something. And people are like, how does that work? And they're like, well, you can set up a committee, structure that has like, basically you can kind of buy in to be on the steering committee, or you can have them buy in to be on this other committee. I was like, or what if we just say, we appreciate your donation? And they're like, well, that's an option too. I was like, let's do that. Because I want fewer cooks in the kitchen, not just because when you get a bunch of people that all, if they feel like they can pay to play, then it can go south in a hurry. So I think the right people there makes sense, but anyone who doesn't actually add value to our effort doesn't help. I would just as soon have a commission or like a committee of like 9 people, right? So I have a call every week with some people from the League of Women Voters here, so we can collaborate. And as we add on other like local organizations and associations, that kind of thing, I think it makes sense to like talk, to strategize, so everyone knows like, hey, this week we're going to be out here doing signature collection, or we've got a 5K benefiting something, and we're going to have a table. Those kinds of things make sense. At this point, policy's written, everything's already filed, so they can't change what we're doing. Yes, Lainey.
So, do we have a little bit of different messaging for like more conservative areas? Because this initiative, even though the meetings that I've come to, I've mostly seen like more liberal leaning people.
Yeah.
I feel like this initiative has a very strong message that would resonate with conservatives. And so I'm just wondering if we have like a little bit different messaging to go kind of to rural areas.
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. We've been working on that. Like, we've kind of got a document that is targeted towards that, and I'm happy to share that. What we've tried to present today is as much in the middle as we can. I do think it's worth saying, like, whenever you're talking to somebody, recognize where you're coming from and who you're talking to, right? Like, we're all good about, like, when I talk to my children, it's a different way than I talk to my wife. Like, and I have to know where I'm coming from, and also how to get through their little skulls if they need to clean the room or whatever it is, right? So those kinds of things. And I think what we found is that, I mean, honestly, there's no research to this, but there's a whole bunch of folks in Oklahoma that are like if here's the full spectrum, these parts are loud, and there's a bunch of folks that are here, right? Like on both sides of the middle, and we all get it. And that's like our bread and butter. The people that we need to talk to the most, Oklahoma is a majority conservative state, regardless of party affiliation. There's a lot of conservative Democrats out there as well. I met a guy the other day, he's been a lifelong Democrat and has never voted for a Democrat. And I was like, seems like you've missed out on some elections, but like, you couldn't vote in any primary then if you were, but it was just an interesting, I was like, tell me more about that. And so recognizing that messaging about like this appeal is the right thing to do, regardless of party affiliation, is helpful. And then for the most part, it's kind of assuaging the concerns of whoever it is you're talking to. Yeah.
People on both sides, sorry, hi Jennifer. People on both sides of the aisle don't trust politicians, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
like a politician shouldn't draw their own lines, shouldn't draw their own district is a universally, like, conservatives believe that, liberals believe that.
Yeah. As one example, early this week, the state chamber had their like legislative panel event. I forget what it was called, luncheon or something. So they had the speaker and the pro tem, who are both Republicans, and then the minority leaders. So McCall Treat, Emily Virgin, and Kay Floyd were on the panel, and this question came up, of course, and so they all gave their answers, and Leader Virgin said, well, I was there in 2011 when we did this, and I got to draw my own district. Now, the party in power basically said, here's Norman, what do you want in there? But that highlights the issue that just because gerrymandering, like there's one party in power, doesn't mean that both parties don't benefit, right? We've seen red districts get redder and blue districts get bluer. It's safer, and that's how you keep everyone happy. Like, I'm gonna get reelected, and you will get reelected, and it's fine. And it's hard for folks to give up that security, right? Like, I've talked to Julia Kurt and Carrie Hicks, Senate District 30 and 40, and their districts bump up against one another. Actually, District 30 is like this, and the other one's in the middle. And Julia Kurt lives down the street from me, and she's like, I mean, probably gonna get drawn out of my district. I was like, yeah, maybe. I mean, they live like less than a mile apart, and so they recognize, like, regardless of who's in charge next time, that might happen. And that's just the way it works, man. Like, we can't always draw districts to ensure people stay in office. Also, with term limits, they're not going to be there next time anyway, so it's silly.
Something else that has really resonated with people when I was talking about it is that the legislature opted themselves out of the Open Meeting Act. So
No.
they exempted themselves so they don't have to tell us what happens in those meetings.
Yeah.
Which obviously that sounds bad.
We'll come back to that in a future year. That's a whole other issue, but yeah, that's kind of nuts. Yeah.
There's a video on YouTube of Arnold Schwarzenegger talking about packing and stacking districts.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, the governor. Yeah. Yeah. The governor also was out there proposing this. No one's asking me if I'm affiliated with Schwarzenegger. Come on. Also, like, to speak to the conservative point, and in my other slides, I may have added pictures in since you came to our Oklahoma City town hall. But Ronald Reagan, John McCain, Bob Dole, John Kasich, Governor Keating, like all of these folks Reagan, if you Google Reagan gerrymandering, there's a ton of quotes where he was like, it's undemocratic, it's un-American, it's a scourge on our democracy, like very strong wording from the Gipper that this was bad. So, and even in 2017, McCain, Dole, Kasich, Keating, and a whole bunch of other folks co-authored a letter, an amicus brief to the Supreme Court saying, you gotta end partisan gerrymandering, like this is terrible. And the court, this year finally ruled and said, we're not gonna rule on it. And so I'm like asking around, if anyone here knows Governor Keating, would like to get him on the phone with me, I'd love to have him write an op-ed, right? Yeah, and the tribes are a little busy, I hear, right now. I've been trying to talk to them too, but they're like, come back. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that might actually be helpful is if you have a list of all of the people on both sides who have said gerrymandering is bad.
Yeah. So we are working on that, and I could list Reagan. We've talked about it. People who are still alive, don't want to put them out there unnecessarily. However, 2 weeks ago, Congressman Markwayne Mullen from up near Tulsa he was at a town hall or did something, and he said, one of the biggest concerns, the worst things we have is districts that are safe. And I was like, that's right there. He just said it.
He'll deny it.
His office has not responded, right? But those, it seeps out, right, in all kinds of ways. And so I will say, I have a long list of Republicans that I have spoken with who are supportive and who have said, oh, you're on the right side of history and I support what you're doing. But I can't be out there saying that, right? Everyone from former party chairs to former elected officials, some can't because of their current jobs or current positions. Some can't because they don't want to mess up their other business. A lot of former officials are lobbyists and they represent all these clients. And they recognize that if they come out for us, that means they're against the legislative leaders, and they'll just not hear their bills. And they're like, listen, this is my livelihood. And I think that highlights how wrong this is, right? If people are afraid, I had someone that's like, I'm acting in this job, and if if my name's associated, I won't be acting in this role anymore. I was like, did someone say they're going to fire you? That's illegal.
Something out that showed, and I understand they don't want to come out publicly, perhaps.
Yeah.
But could you have something that would show quotes of things that they've said publicly?
Yeah. So that's what we're working on.
And I guess I'm thinking more of the Schwarzenegger and the national people.
Yeah.
Than local people.
Right. That's a good question.
But just something that shows that there's support on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a lot of it.
We've got some stuff in the can for like Reagan-related stuff because that's, I think, compelling. It's interesting that Schwarzenegger's come up twice. I always think it'd be fun to put it out there. We've had people say, we can get him to come to Oklahoma. And I was like, I don't know how well Californians are received in Oklahoma, regardless. I think it'd be cool, like maybe at a monster truck rally or I don't know. Also, he's not very tall, so I want a picture where he's only like 5'8", so that's just me. But yeah, so this is helpful, and I like hearing like what you guys feel resonates, right? And this is, I've been trying to provide information so that when someone's like, well, does anyone care about this? And you're like, Reagan, whoever, even Schwarzenegger, and people are like, oh, okay. Some of that can go a long way. All right, how will this impact rural areas? We're getting close to our break time, just so you know. I see people, if you gotta go to the bathroom, please do, but we'll stop in just a minute. How would this impact rural areas? Again, this is one of those issues, the questions that I think we heard more in rural areas, right? In Oklahoma, for one, we have to wait and see what the census data says. But what we expect based on other census data is that the population of rural areas is decreasing, which is why they really need to do the census to make sure everyone gets counted. I mean, we all do, because Oklahoma missed out on a lot last time. We've got to get everyone to do the census, but the population is decreasing. And this is going on around the world and other countries too, rural areas. People are moving to urban areas. And that necessarily means that their districts will get larger, but that doesn't mean that they have to lose their vote or that they don't matter, right? Like the way the districts are right now is that a lot of the rural districts like stretch into an urban area, and often the legislator lives in the city, right? And so, and they can say like, I represent the rural area. I just want to live close to all these amenities and here in these schools, and like at the very, like that's just not genuine, right? They're like, I represent you, but I am not from you. Like I'm not one of you kind of thing. And that's a tough message. Now, most people like their legislators generally. They're like, oh, those bums, vote them out. But not my guy, he's fine. And so recognizing that regardless of where you live in Oklahoma, an independent commission is good for all Oklahomans, right? And it's not about urban versus rural. It's about people, not politicians. And the more that you pivot to that and this is about the why, not the how. An independent commission draws districts based on where voters live, not where politicians live. Right? Again, in McAllister split down the middle. Like I have a picture of me holding signs of the two districts in the middle of a neighborhood street. Like it just, these people are in one district, these are in another. And that happened decades ago, because a guy wanted to move to the city from outside the city. And so they just moved the districts. And he waited until it was time to do the redistricting, and they just moved the line so he can move in and keep his seat. And that's not okay, right? Like, what about those people? What about the tens of thousands of voters who that represents? So again, pivoting back to this is about people, not politicians. This is about what's doing what's fair. This is about holding politicians accountable, because if they think they're going to get reelected in a rural area, then they don't have to listen to those people, right? And in most districts, they just like, oh, I got reelected again. No one even ran against me. And then they can do whatever they want, right? And so we, by making sure that the districts are drawn in a way that is fair and that represents where we live, not where they live, that's key. Does this give all the power to the judiciary, to those activist judges, liberal activist judges? Again, no. It's not like Ruth Bader Ginsburg is on the state Supreme Court. I guess that's who they're afraid of. I don't even know. She's the only. I learned yesterday that Justice Alito's wife is from Oklahoma, though. Fun fact. I don't know. It's not worth anything, but yeah.
I was just going to say the fallback position
Yeah.
in the policy, which moves this to the judiciary,
Yeah. Right. So that's a good question. I'm glad you brought that up. So in the event that the commission cannot agree on a map and they run out of time, there's a time limit. How many? 4 months, 6 months? They can't pass maps within the time allotted. Then the fallback mechanism, it goes to the Supreme Court to pick a map. The court would not be drawing the maps. They would be picking a map from the ones that have been submitted or proposed. There's a fallback mechanism right now. We've never used it. Like the legislature's always drawn it. They even changed it several years ago to make it because it was a bunch of statewide elected offices that were all Democrats, and so they wanted to change it to make it not Democrats because that once the party changed, they wanted to change how it's structured. But it's never been used. Also, the courts are essentially the fallback regardless, right? If there's a law, something you don't like now, like We the People, you could take it to court. People take it to court. Even if someone challenged, last time we did redistricting, there was a lawsuit against the districts that goes to the Supreme Court. Like ultimately, that's who it goes to. That's why we have them. And so it makes sense that they would be the fallback. And I think the politicians, politicians like saying the courts are activist and liberal and stuff, but most people, our polling says most people trust at least our state Supreme Court. Like, no, that's why they're there. It's an important thing. Jennifer?
I was just gonna say, just like really clearly you just said this, but to me, whenever I've gotten those questions, it's like once there's the 60 people, the judiciary is completely out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So like up to that point, the judiciary has a role, but as of the like 60 people part, then it's literally like lottery.
Yeah,
drawing.
yeah.
So the idea that the judiciary is picking, hand-picking these 9 people.
Yeah.
is kind of absurd.
Yeah, like what you often hear is the opposition, we'll say politicians saying, this gives all the power to the judges. And I was like, no, they just like screen some applications and then randomly pick people. And then they're out. That's it. They have zero role in drawing the maps and that stuff, so.
Also, the judges themselves are picked randomly at the beginning.
Right,
It's
right.
not like we're saying, yes, you.
Yeah, right.
You judge.
Yeah. I suspect, no one said this, but I think currently the Chief Justice, which changes every few years, but the current Chief Justice, I think might be a Democrat, and that's probably part of the scare. I'm not even sure. I haven't met her, but that's what I've heard. So, yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, would the legislature approve the budget for the commission staff?
Yeah, the legislature has to approve the budget. And we struggled with that. Like, we debated putting in a specific dollar figure, but no one likes seeing a dollar figure. The polling, everyone's like, oh, it costs too much, even if it's not very much. And we legitimately have no idea how much they spend right now because they're not subject to open records. We do know they've hired a consultant for like $150,000 a year, but we don't know what else. And so that's not a good look. So.
One thing to that end, I know there's some concern that like because of this, right, the politicians don't like this, so maybe they won't fund it. They will have a very difficult time if the people of Oklahoma vote for it, even for things that they don't like.
Right.
They ultimately, they are not gonna go against the will of the people.
Right.
For the most part.
Right. And worst case, if they did, by some chance, the beat goes on. Like the commission, all the data, the census data is made public to all of us, and there's open source tools, so the public has to be allowed to download the data and to submit maps. And so we had this discussion, like in a worst case scenario, in a world where the legislature doesn't fund the commission, we could draw a map, and like us in this room could get together and we could talk about maps and we could submit the map, and it would still go to the courts to decide. And I expect like both parties would submit maps, and we could, I don't know, if we all each individually submitted the exact same maps, we could like stuff the ballot box for maps. I don't know. Like there are ways like at the end of the day, we're like, we could specify a number, or we could entrust our legislators to do the one thing they got to do in this situation and just fund it, right? And then they're out of it. That's why we elect them, is to make those funding decisions, and we could still get a map through. That's going to be more fair than politicians drawing their own, right? Like, yeah.
So is the commission staff, does that continue through the 9.5 years that the commission isn't meeting,
Now, once the maps are done, then they're done.
But
There's,
then for 10 years.
Yep. There's not an ongoing need for anything or ongoing cost. Yeah. And so the way it's kind of set up is the legislature appropriates money to the commission to do their work and buy whatever tools they need and to do their meetings and all that stuff. And then once they're all done, whatever money's left over just goes back into the general revenue fund.
And I was just gonna say, I think one of the strengths of this is that it would be a constitutional amendment, which it's not like it's a legislative decision.
Right. Yeah, they can't fiddle with it.
Which weakens it, and of those 14 that are passed, I don't know how many of those are actually constitutional amendments versus legislative process.
I don't remember either. Several, but not all. Not
Right.
only 26 states have a initiative petition process like this,
Right.
because our founding fathers and mothers, right, like recognize that we may not always trust our government to do the right thing.
Alfalfa bill was good to be skeptical.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. So the other thing is that I've had people resonate on is like it's only used in retired justices. So it's not even people that are in office, right? The Chief Justice draws 3 names out, and everyone else is out of the game. And they're just coming out of retirement to like, okay, I'll draw some names and review some applications. So, all right, is the commission less accountable to voters? So is this just a bunch of unelected bureaucrats? They are unelected. They apply for this job like they would apply for anything. They are not legislators, all those things we went through. Also, just on the face value, if you pause and you think, well, politicians love to say, that they're the ones that are really accountable to voters. Except when they gerrymander their own districts and get elected without an opponent. Not accountable, right? Everyone's like, well, you can just vote me out. And I always say, we don't vote anybody out. We vote for someone else. But if no one else runs, you can't vote them out. It's not like a vote of no confidence, right? Like, I've been in churches where like the church body had a vote to either like continue with the pastor or a vote of no confidence where they'd have to leave, which is a terrifying thing if you're him. But that's not the option. With judges, I think we can do that. Like we can retain or not. But with state legislators, it's not. Like I live in House District 88, which is Jason Dunnington, and he has not had an opponent for most of his time in the legislature. And I keep joking with him. I'm like, listen, we agree on most stuff, and I support what you're doing, but I want you to work for it, man. And he's like, I'm gonna get a primary opponent. I was like, good. You don't just get to freewheel into office every 2 years. And so I think the idea that they would say, well, these are unaccountable because you could vote out the politicians. In theory, you could vote them out if you didn't like the map they already passed, and what they already passed, what the hell do they care? Like, they've already gerrymandered it so they can stay in office, and that map's in there regardless, right? And so that's the whole point. Also, it's not unaccountable to voters. The commission is literally voters. It's you and I, like it's people. And so, yeah, during all that. There is actually increased accountability and increased involvement by the public with the commission. Virtually all voters are able to apply, except for those who we said earlier can't, right, for a period of time. All of the meetings are open to the public. They're all open meetings. All of the data is available to the public. We can submit our own maps. And if we don't like the maps, you can still sue. The first 4 things are not the case with how it is right now, right? Like, even the first one, right? They could say, oh, well, all voters can run for office. I'm like, well, yes and no. Like it takes a certain amount of money and effort to run for office in the first place. The threshold is higher to run for office than it is for being on the commission. And the legislature is not subject to open records, open meetings. The data is not public. None of that's public. You can't submit your own maps. There's no involvement. They go do it. They might do some town hall meetings and solicit information. Good for them. But those meetings, it's not binding. At the end of the day, they can come out and listen to you and be like, okay, thanks for your input. And then they just go tell their, at the same time, their consultants are in a hotel drawing gerrymandered maps. So I'll wait for her to take a picture. There we go. They're fine. All right, so I think, okay, sweet. Back to the messaging. Just as a reminder, who we are, what we're trying to do, and the why are the 3 important things. I've had this slide 3 times because it's kind of important. Okay. So we're going to do a Q&A with the staff now, although we've been doing questions along the way, and I love it. How about we switch things up a little bit? Let's take a 5-minute break right now, and we'll come back. We'll get some chairs up here. We'll do a few questions, and then we'll just roll from that into the little group activity. Does that sound okay? All right, I think most everybody's back. So I'll take just a couple of minutes. Katrina and Jennifer are going to join me up here, so it's not just me. If there's any, Katrina is one of our organizers here in Oklahoma City. She, aside from doing photography and graphic design, is now getting to move out in front of people, and so you will see her around town if you come to some of our events as we move forward. And Jennifer's with our comms team. She's getting some more fuel back there. I have that bad habit of I just perpetually want to warm up my coffee. It's like being at IHOP where they're always there warming it up, and then by the end of the day, I'm like, I drank way too much. So we wanted to, just take a few minutes to answer any questions. I will start with one that I had from someone during the break about, they asked if we could clarify the current process. I said that it happens, people go into a smoke-filled room, but what really happens? And on one hand, we don't entirely know because it's not a public process. From the people I have spoken with, legislators who were there previously, the process is different with the House and Senate and how they handle it. But I know for someone in the House, they basically said they usually hire a consultant. The Senate's already announced who they're hiring, and they start working on it. But they will call in each legislator and basically say, here's your district. Do you want to change anything? How does it look? Are you okay with that? And kind of ask for input along the way. They have some internal staff that usually work on this. But from other stories I've heard, they often have consultants, and in other states, they often do get a hotel room, downtown somewhere that's not in the capital, for presumably ethical reasons, vaguely ethical reasons, but to take some of that process out. And so we don't know who else is in that room. So we don't know. We know they talk to lobbyists and big donors and special interests. This happens a lot. 2 years ago, I remember when we had a really big budget shortfall, and Governor Fallon there was a news story about the budget discussions where it had her and some of her staff, the pro tem, and some of them, the speaker and people from the House, and they were calling people on the phone, like Larry Nichols and Harold Hamm and the big donors and stuff. And it was in the news, and I was like, well, you called them about the state budget? They're a voter just like I am. You didn't call me. And so when we know that kind of thing happens in other government processes, it does not bode well for these that have equally important implications. Anything that you guys have heard that you want to add into that?
How much those consultants cost?
Well, we know the Senate is
150? Yeah, I think so.
for theirs,
Yeah.
and that's not to say
150 million or
150,000, yeah. For one,
Still a big number.
yeah. So the Senate, this part was made public, but they announced already that they've hired a guy named Keith Beal, who was the chief of staff for Lieutenant Governor Todd Lamb and was his campaign manager when he ran for governor, which didn't work out well for Governor Lamb, but that's who they hired. So but they'll say, oh, this is a nonpartisan. We're hiring a nonpartisan consultant. And I was like, he was literally the chief of staff for the lieutenant governor and ran his gubernatorial campaign. You can't get more partisan. So there's that for what that's worth.
I think the main thing is no one really knows. The
Yeah.
politicians know how
Right.
the process works.
Yeah.
But the average people don't know how the process works.
Yeah, I talked to one former state legislator who said, well, I'll tell you what we didn't consider. We didn't consider communities of interest. We didn't talk about, what our district looked like. What we did talk about was, how far people had to drive for FFA meetings when they campaign and those kinds of things. And it was a very like, I was like, well, it was exactly what I expected to hear, and it was still disappointing. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
Are there just like a few like bullet point things that we can like unequivocally say about, the current process? Like XYZ has never happened, so and such, always happens.
Right. Probably because I'm a therapist, I try to stay away from always and never, because that's just opening to being proven wrong. We will say that it is not transparent, because it is not open to the public. The legislature is not subject to open records, and so they don't share any of this information. We don't know how much it costs, or how much they spend on this. What we do have to look at is the result. We have the maps. We can see where they divided communities. We can see, we know how much public input they had, if they did public meetings or not. And we also know that this has been going on since statehood by both parties. And that at the end of the day, we do know that politicians are drawing their own districts. And that's the part that's not okay.
Well, and that to me, like the thing that, and I was talking about this in the back with somebody during the break, was the one thing that I think that we can say unequivocally is no matter what the process, because they'll say like, oh, well, the people on the commission are going to have a bias, and like everybody has a bias, right? Well, sure, we all have biases, we all have points of view, but it will unequivocally be less partisan than it is today because it's not politicians drawing their own districts. So like no matter, like sure they'll have a position, but it will be less political than politicians having a position.
Right.
Something else that we've talked about is the use of data in all of this. As computers have gotten more sophisticated, people used to do this by hand with like maps, and now people have a lot of data about all of us, whether you're trying really hard to keep yourself off of that or not. There's consumer data, there's all sorts of data in voter files, and they can like literally pick their voters based on, oh, this person's going to vote for me, I want them in my district. Their neighbor not going to vote for me, let's just stick them in the other one.
Yeah, and we don't know what data they use. We know census data is part of it, but we don't know historically what other data sources they have. And yeah, I think after the last election cycle, we're all concerned about how our data is being used, right? Like, and that kind of thing is, I think, concerning.
And I think one thing that you prompted, and it might be a question that one of you bring up because we've heard it, is, well, why can't computers just draw the maps? Why do we need people involved at all? And so chime in here, but from my position, it's like data can help, right? Like data is a tool that we can use, but at the end of the day, like we need real humans looking at like communities of interest and like making sure that we are thinking outside of just purely what the data says, because what the data says might not necessarily be right, what's right for a neighborhood or right for a community. And so that's just something that has come up because, I mean, honestly, like the software exists that a computer could draw the maps, but would it be best for what's best for Oklahoma, what's best for people's communities of interest? Probably not.
And someone's got to program that software in the first place.
Right.
A human, yeah.
I was just going to point out, I mean, I don't know the extent to which the state process mirrors, but our Office of Research and Economic Development for the city of Oklahoma City used to control the redistricting for municipal boundaries. And in that process, our office also was a repository for the census information. And when I worked there, we were on the cusp of the change from what was called a dual independent mapping system of the Census Bureau, and they were moving to Tiger Maps. And I don't remember the exact acronym on that, but it was very much more detailed and sophisticated level of data, even down to the block level within census tracts, census blocks. Now, certain data is suppressed on individuals. That's where people come into it. So if you're drawing a district boundary that has to contain so many people, by definition, you still have the ability as human beings to exclude certain tracts and include others, which gets you then that irregular boundary where you're reaching out to get communities of your interest, not necessarily
Yeah.
communities of interest.
Right.
Well, and I
And
think,
it was interesting because I remember in that time frame back in the 80s, I do remember that we had some very unusual shaped districts with protuberances of all kinds. And, it was interesting, but in the final analysis, the council had the ability to say which version they were going to do. We did not use independent consultants at that time. I have no idea if they will this time around.
Yeah.
But we did that within the Office of Research and Economic Development because we were the repository for the census data and other.
Fascinating.
Now, I don't know whether, the thing I've wondered about is whether or not there's whether they split census tracts and do redistricting along sub-census tract boundaries, where they could split a block. Does anybody know that?
yes, they do.
Can they do that? They can split blocks.
They can.
That's
We've-
where you
we've-
really get some gerrymandering
Yes,
going on.
we've driven on the lines where blocks have been.
My neighborhood, Gatewood, which is like 2 miles from here,
Right.
literally split. It's about 3/4, 1/4, but split down the middle, 2 different state senate districts, so.
Now, they have, logically, they have to draw the boundary somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But down
There's
the
gonna
middle
be
of
a
a
boundary.
neighborhood.
Right.
So the question is,
Yeah, right.
where?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're right, even under the best scenario, you're gonna end up with some things that split communities of interest.
Sure.
To think that it's going to be perfect is.
Right.
Well, and I think
is a
we've been
little
really careful
unrealistic,
to
But I agree
say,
with you, better than
We
what
just
it
want
is
better.
now.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
and I
And
think we've been careful to say, like, the districts are crazy looking. Andy didn't include the maps. Like, a lot of them are crazy looking. We're not saying that we're gonna make districts be perfect squares, right? Like, there
No.
are, like, it's impossible to do, like, that's not really what we're going for. But at the end of the day, like, you talked about down to the, like, individual information
Blocks.
isn't necessarily available. But politicians know where their
They-
voters
and
live,
that's
and
where
they
they
know where
en-
their voters live.
That's where
and
they
like,
enter
so,
into those district boundaries, because they do know where they live.
it's that's when you look at maps, a lot of them you're like, oh, this makes sense. Like
Right.
House District 85, 80, whatever Cindy Munson's district is, 85. Northwest Expressway is like the southern boundary, which makes sense, right? Like Expressway is a really wide road, and arguably it's kind of different communities-ish on both sides. And there's like one, so that makes sense, but there's a little cutout, like a little triangle. I'm like, well, what's that? Like that's, let's look for, is that like an unqueue? Like, and maybe that's the way it has to be, or why is that? And other thing, like Lake Overholser, Senate District 30 cuts Lake Overholser in half, like the water. And I was like, well, that's weird. But it's the county line. Like, okay, like they got to stop somewhere. That makes sense.
We walked the district that ran from Yukon to Tinker.
Oh yeah, that's yeah.
We did think there was purpose to
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
As we analyzed some of the different
Yeah.
neighborhoods, we not.
Yeah, yeah. That's good. Terry.
So the term gerrymandering doesn't merely mean politicians drawing their own districts, does
Right.
it? It means drawing districts in a way that is dishonest, or whatever, how you.
Yeah.
Beneficial to them.
Yeah.
Beneficial to
Yeah. Racial yeah. Yep.
Et cetera. I just wanted to check on that for one thing, because I think, because it seems like when people are going to have to contend with the concept of districting at all,
Mm-hmm.
which is hard to voluntarily deal with, and if you're getting it pushed on you, so, all the things that had to be considered in drawing districts, the things like, are we gonna split a block, or the communities of interest, to me, it seems like it's important to bring those up and let people know that this is a very complex
Yes.
task.
Yeah.
And we have to take these things into consideration because we want representation for communities, et cetera. So what this law will do, or amendment or whatever will do, is just take one, make it less complex.
Yeah.
Because we won't be looking for at party, or we won't have the parties involved in drawing districts.
Yeah, right,
One
right.
of the
Yeah, it
things-
would make more fair.
One of the things that I like, and this is like one of the wonky things that you find in the policy that you probably don't want to go too in the weeds on, I know, but one of the things that I like the most about the policy is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm remembering it correctly, in order to pass a map through the commission, so remember you have 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, 3 independents, others, you have to get 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, 2 others to all vote for it. So just the idea that like you have to draw a map that like all 3 parties or all like kind of everyone would agree that this is like the right thing to do. It is complex and it's hard to do that, but like I like that piece of it, that it's like it has to be a nonpartisan, bipartisan map to get those 3 parties on the same page to approve it.
I like the criteria that
Yeah.
were listed too, by which you draw these
Yeah.
districts.
Yeah.
That's worth reading.
It is, I mean, I think Terry's exactly right. Like, redistricting is hard. It's not, which is fine. Like, it shouldn't be super easy just to clump a bunch of voters together, right? It's a hard process. People are complicated. Neighborhoods are complicated. But if we can do it in a way that doesn't involve politicians drawing their own boundaries, because it'll hold them accountable. And just a quick step out on the why, something I haven't said today that I think you all get, but just to say it so it's explicitly clear. What happens when politicians draw their own boundaries? They're not accountable to voters. If they're not accountable, what do?
They do
Right.
what they want
Yeah,
to do.
what they want, or nothing sometimes. And so people are like, a good entrance that I've had to this conversation, people are like, why is this important? I was like, are you sick of talking about education funding? Are you sick of hospitals closing? Are you tired of these roads looking like this? Like, do you ever wonder why they haven't fixed these things? Because they're like, well, the people want it. Yeah, well, they don't care what the people want, because as long as they can get in, then they can do whatever laws they want for other special interests and stuff. And it's like, if we want to keep getting the same result, then we keep doing the way we've been doing it, and that's not what people want. So, yes, sir. I think we'll do Potts and then up here to Cindy.
Is this presentation available?
Not yet, but it can
Will
be.
you send it to me?
I will. Yes.
You take such extensive notes.
There's actually been several people who've asked
Yeah.
to get those slides.
Yeah, I'm sure we can do that.
And then
And I would say something you all get, as long as we have your email address after this, is we're kind of building a little toolkit for all of you that will have some like graphics you can use, some like, because I know many of you have taken notes, and you'll get home and be like, that was a lot of information and I've since forgotten it. So in like a week, you'll get an email with a little like explainer, it's all tied up with a bow, Christmas present from us on how to talk about the campaign and tools you can use to do that. And included in that will be like how to host an event, right? So like if you're like, I want to, like Mom, if you want to like invite your friends over, you'll be like, Andy, what do I do? I'm like, here, just read this. Here's a checklist, right? Like, and those kind of things, so that you kind of know how to do it, because it can be, most of you probably haven't, I've never like, I have twice, but invited people into your house to be like, let's talk about gerrymandering, right? Like it's a weird dinner party, but it's not. And yeah, but except like it sounds weird now because you've never done it, and then once you do it, you're like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. Trick or treating also sounds weird, and yet we do it all every year, so it's not that weird. We can make it happen.
And also, like, I wouldn't be a good comms team member if I didn't stand up here and say, like, we're trying to make it really easy to, like, engage. So, like, if you have any interest in writing a letter to the editor,
Yes.
giving us, like, a quote where we could, like, take a cool little picture of you and, like, put a little quote on a social media graphic, anything, like, we will come to your house and, like, do it.
Yeah.
Like,
Me
I.
coming to the house.
That's true. I did just volunteer Christina and Maggie to like go to your house.
Yeah.
But we would go to your house. I'll go to your house. But like obviously like it's in the name, right? The more like people that are involved in this, and Andy's right, like we are just a bunch of people. And so like we need to show that. We need to show that there's a bunch of people that are engaged in this, like average citizens that care about this issue. You do not have to write a letter to the editor. Like me or Maggie or Crystal will write it for you and like send it to not anything, but like if you want to do that, Crystal or Maggie are happy to take your name. Any way that you want to engage, we'll do all the work for you and make sure that you approve all of it and know where it's being used. But like we definitely want to get out the message that this is like average people interested in this, want to change the system, and in order to do that, we need average people to be a part of it.
Yeah, because your friends care more about what you say than what I say, right? So like, I can be up here all day and my picture can be out there, but that's just one more white guy saying something we don't necessarily need, right? Like, and so having you, if you're on Facebook and you see your neighbor's face on there, and you're like, oh, that's Laura, I know her. And it's like, I support people, not politicians, because blah, or we should end gerrymandering because politicians should be accountable to voters, or whatever it is. That kind of thing goes a long way. And as an example, there's a woman in Tulsa that's been super supportive. She's like, I want to write a letter every week. And so we got her picture the other day, and we had a quote from her, and the quote was like, support people, not politicians. And we talked about it. We're like, thank you. But like, why is it important to you? Because that's just plastering it out there is maybe less impactful than like specifically why. And each of you have your own story, right?
There it is.
Story?
You said story.
Now, I mean, we've joked that like the Medicaid expansion folks have it easy because they can talk about people who's, have suffered from, and like, maybe none of you have suffered from gerrymandering. However, you have suffered because politicians are not accountable. They haven't done things, and we all have that story. And so think about what that means to you, and then.
In fact, I think we have little signs with
Well, they're
us.
not signs, they're like little sheets of paper.
Yeah. But like it
Yeah.
says like, why do I care? And like you can literally write it in and hold it in front of you, and we'll take your picture today if you really want.
Did we?
They're not signs, but they're.
It's so you can like.
I'm just gonna have to show.
Yes.
They're like, so you can just read them.
Ah.
You would
Yes.
Oh, I see.
Yes. So if you're interested, we'll say this. When we wrap up here in about 30 minutes or so, when we're all done, Maggie's got a bunch of strips of paper.
Paper and markers.
Yeah.
Big sign.
And yeah.
You can make sense.
Also, like afterwards, see Maggie and read that and be like, I would say that. And then we will help you say that. So let's go in the back and then we'll come back up here. Oh, Cindy's still been waiting patiently. I'm sorry.
I apologize. So I have a comment and then a question.
Yeah.
And the comment pertains to the messaging in this presentation. And I know you've had focus groups and you've studied it, but in the description of how the commission is formed, rather than Republican, Democrat, Independent, Republican, Democrat, other,
Yeah.
To me is a lot more palatable. There are a fair number of libertarians in Oklahoma,
Yeah.
as you know, and they don't see themselves up there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's my comment, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. They are. Yeah.
And then my question pertains to the challenge. My recollection was that there was something pertaining to that not being proportional representation, those three groups. And you don't have to go into the weeds if you don't want to, but.
Right. So that was wrapped in with their argument. This violates your First Amendment right, and like the one person, one vote thing. That is arguably the weakest part of their argument. Because it doesn't, this isn't a representative body in the elected sense. It's not like the legislature. And it's really subject to who all applies, right? Like the commission can't be selected from folks that don't apply. And so I forget the exact argument, but if you want to go online and read the response, our attorney did an excellent job of explaining this.
I will say that's one thing. I think that's one thing that some of the politicians are now saying that this is over-representing the other, right?
Yeah.
Like that this will give the other category too much power based on their
Because there are
percentage
fewer
of.
others, but they still have a third.
But really, I mean, so whenever they say that, they're saying it should be more partisan than it is. So like, I mean, okay, like I disagree. You know what I mean?
That's a
Like,
completely opposite reality
Yeah.
versus what they're saying, because there are more independents and non-political people in this state than there are Republicans and
sure,
Democrats.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think.
If anything, they're underrepresented.
Right. Well, and I think it's hard it seems like it's hard for highly partisan folks to imagine a world where people are not as partisan as they are often, right? And so that's when they're like, well, this eliminates the vote of one party, and it's like, well, this isn't about partisanship. This is about power. So yeah. Let's go in the back first here, and then.
This is sort of a ridiculous scenario, but for the sake of robustness, is there a mechanism to handle if there isn't an application? Or like, if none of the retired judges apply to do this, is there a mechanism to just pick
Right.
judges?
That is an excellent question, and I feel like we talked about this, and I don't remember the answer, but I'll find out and I can get to you. A similar question that's come up is, what if we don't have enough people apply for the commission? And that was my concern first, because I was like, what if people don't care? Michigan's doing this right now, and they've had more than 7,000 applicants, and so I think it's up to all of us to help kind of keep doing that. So,
Imagine that people will
yeah,
apply.
yeah.
It's just like, if there's some kind of mechanism in place where people can be like, well, this is just gonna bounce back to like the politicians or to the courts.
Right.
Because no one's gonna know about it.
Yeah.
because Oklahoma's so bad at political messaging.
Yeah. I think also this is another opportunity, another place for us, like the public, to promote this and push it, right? And so the more that we talk about it, even retired justices, like they, at that level, in my experience is they have a general like sense of patriotism and like wanting to serve their country and their state and do the right thing. And so I think that's the kind of opportunity people would say yes. Also, that's why it's not just retired Supreme Court, because it might be a smaller pool. I think we added up how many retired people, and it's 20-something people that would be eligible to be drawn out. So yeah.
Also, it's all of our jobs. Welcome. To make sure that people know that this is happening and know that there will be a commission, so that people will apply.
Yeah.
That's part of our messaging as
Yeah.
well.
If we do the campaign right, the whole state will know. and
That's
be
right.
Super excited to apply.
That's right. That's right. I've since forgotten I think you were next, and then I'm going to go in a circle. So, yes, ma'am.
Well, my questions jump ahead to where, after we get the green light, will all petition carriers, signature gatherers need to be trained?
That's a good question. We're going to benefit from the fact that we will be going third or arguably fourth this year, right? So Medicaid did theirs, 803 did theirs. Criminal justice will start on the 26th, and we will be after that at some point. And so many of you have already been trained. Cindy has like made a whole training presentation for this that's super great. We will how to do it. So we will do trainings, but we've talked to people from other campaigns. We kind of know who people are that have been through those trainings, and you don't have to like come audit the class or anything. I think we will benefit a lot from having this great team of folks who are like, I got it, just give me the papers and let me get out there, and we can help that happen.
How will the petitions be distributed to different folks?
So we're working on that right now, and because we're trying to wait and see how criminal justice does theirs. I've talked to the folks from Medicaid about how they did it to like learn from their lessons. We will have people carrying it, and we will also have locations where you can go, right? Because people like that. Not as many folks go to locations as complain about them not being locations. Like, you don't have any places I can go. And then we put them out there, and they're like, no one showed up. But you got to do it, right? Like,
I wasn't going to be there at that time.
yeah, right. So we'll try to have a two-pronged approach, but yeah.
How many signatures will we need to gather, and how long do we have?
So we need 178,000, and we have 90 days, which is the same as Medicaid and criminal justice, because them and us are all constitutional amendments. So we will actually need to get 250,000, right? Because they're not all going to be valid, and you got to have a buffer and dissuade people from challenging your signatures. So we'll get extra. I don't know that we're going to get more than Medicaid did, because they got more than anybody else. And I told Amber I want to get one more than they did. But also, like, that's a lot of money and time and effort. And I laughed that she was going for that. I think that was a sense of personal pride. And also at the point that we do it, like, everyone's wrist is going to be sore from all these petitions we're signing this year. So,
Better weather conditions.
well, that's what we're hoping. Yeah, you never know. February in Oklahoma is always hot and cold. So,
Andy, real quick,
Yeah.
and I'm really sorry, I have to say, I have a 5-year-old who has a basketball game
Oh,
at
yes.
5:30, so I'm gonna sneak out, but Maggie and Crystal are both here from the comms team, and again, are ready, like, as we leave, if you wanna give to the communications effort, great, and, Andy has my contact.
papers for you,
She now has signs, cause Maggie's the best.
oh, nice.
But they're in process. And Andy has my contact information if
Yeah.
you have any communications questions.
Yeah.
but
Thank you,
I'm gonna
Jennifer.
try to sneak out, sorry.
Appreciate it. Good luck to the
Thank you.
kiddo.
I know.
Yeah. All right. We're going to do 3 more. Right now, he has had his hand up, and then we'll come back over here. Go ahead,
I
sir.
was just gonna say, as we're talking friends and family, are there any industries or something you guys are still looking that you need? Like, it sounds like you got legal covered, but anything else like that?
That's a good question. We have legal covered. We've got communications covered. I think the big thing we need is people, right? Like, and like, yeah, we need introductions. We need volunteers to carry petitions, to get out there. We need people to host. Like, we need your name and your face for letters to the editor, for social media posts. I mean, simple as like, we can take your photo. We can put up a graphic behind you, and you can just stand there with the sign today, and then we'll get all that and schedule it out. We need more people to validate what we're doing and be out there. And then having house parties. So Crystal and I made a big list the other day of everyone we know that we think we can ask to host like a coffee meetup or a house party or something at their house to invite their friends over to come. So those are the big things. However,
You might need a volunteer coordinator.
yeah, I mean, yes,
Sometimes you're gonna have a lot of people that are willing to volunteer,
yeah,
but if you don't have somebody to manage them, then you can't put that power to them.
that's right. Yeah, we have Katrina here, and we have a guy in Tulsa, and then we have another guy named Joe who couldn't be there this morning. That's kind of the director of all of our organizers and stuff. So to help with that, but we always need more help, right? Also, different people have different skill sets and tools, right? So Mr. Potts was like, how about a coloring book with crazy looking districts for the kids? And I was like, that's a great idea, right? So there's those things. And talking to folks in other states like Michigan, you know, some people in the Michigan campaign last year, you know, there's 2 peninsulas, right? So the upper peninsula, not the mitten, but the other one. They're the thumb, yes. They're called Yoopers. That's what they call themselves. People who live up there. Yeah.
The Upper Peninsula are the Yoopers.
The Yoopers, yeah. And so someone volunteered from up there and said, listen, we will cover the Upper Peninsula. We're going to go to all the PTAs. You don't come. If you come up here, they're not going to like you. So stay down there. And the campaign was like, yeah, and like, we got it. And they went to 240 something PTA meetings and got all these PTA meetings. They just went and said, this is what we're doing. Would you just say, we support that? And the PTA's all like, yes, we vote for that. And they all supported it. It's non-binding. They don't make any, but to come back and say, we had 240 PTAs that support this anti-gerrymandering thing is a huge deal, right? And so that's the kind of stuff we needed. You guys have connections for that kind of thing that I don't have, that, you know, so whatever you've got, hit us up.
Literally the best thing you can do for us is make sure that everyone in your life knows that this is happening and knows why it's important, because then they'll sign and volunteer and vote.
Yeah. I mean, we need 178 signatures, but we need like 800,000 votes. So that's a higher number. Yeah, first things first. So, yeah, fingers crossed. Okay, Jan.
I
Then
was
come back
just
over here.
wondering with your slide stack, you'll have the maps, the crazy map.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could give specifics on how it's crazy. I know you
Oh, right, yes.
talked about it
Uh-huh.
with the presentation.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to have specifics, because I look at it and I don't see
Right,
the craziness of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I see the crazy shape,
right.
but.
But the little nuanced things about it, yeah, that's helpful. One of the things that we will send out in your little kit, right, is the slide deck that I've used for the town hall meetings, and we've kind of refined it over time. And in that, I have like notes, and it's in PowerPoint, and there's like notes in there that's like, you can use it as a script if you can print it out and have it on there if you feel comfortable. If you want to use that, you don't have to, but that's the kind of thing I will add that because I have not put that in there. That's a good suggestion. So let's go over. I think you were next. No, sorry. We'll go with Kaki. I think Kaki will be the last one.
I was just gonna circle back to, the comment about the commission not being properly representative because it's 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and 3 other. The legislature, when it creates commissions, thinks that the branches of government are the House, the Senate, and the governor. So that's not very representative either.
That's a good point. That's a good line to refute the whole judiciary thing too. Where, yeah.
It over-represents the legislature.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Of course, now they're trying to go towards giving everything to the governor, apparently.
Yeah, that's right. All right, Kaki, and then we'll.
I just wanted to know if you had a timeline for the house parties.
Between now and November 3rd, 2020. So you're on our list. You're one that we wrote down. So yeah, Crystal's got a comment.
I received a question during the break about the timeline on the back end after this passes in November next year.
Uh-huh.
Like the 2021 timeline, what that looks like for this process and getting the.
Yeah, implementation. Yeah. So when we're successful and we pass it on the ballot, it is effective immediately. That's what's cool about ballot initiatives. It's November 4th. It's in effect. And so basically in December, so like redistricting starts basically in April of 2021. And so it's right after the election happens and presumably will be successful, right? Then the government's got to start work. And it's not up to the legislature to do everything. It's up to the courts and and so they have to start kind of getting everything lined up. And so they will open applications. There's dates in the policy that say like by this date this has to happen and by this date this has to happen. And those dates, would apply each time. And so they will have to, when they have to put out the call for applications, when they have to get the panel in place and all that stuff. So it's not impossible, but it's a robust kind of timeline between the election and like April 1st of the next year, because that's when the census data comes out. And then the commission, I don't know if it's 120 days or 180 days, but it's one or the other to do the work, which should be plenty of time.
So election of November of 21 is when we're gonna see the results of that, hopefully.
So the way it works. So this will be much easier once it's next year. I have to say this, but the election for this issue will be next year. And then and so the census and the election all happen next year. Then the following year in 2021 is when redistricting happens. And then those districts are in place for 2022. So they have to draw them. And when they draw them in 21, people are in office already. And so the next election, which is the next gubernatorial election, that time would be when it's in effect. So basically, whatever legislators win next year, like next November, they will be the ones in office that will be subject. And so some of them will have their districts change on them while they're in office. So that's the...
And I think that's a good visual for how long we're going to be involved. Really.
Yeah.
We are.
Yeah, that's... we've started now having those conversations about how do we plan for implementation, because once we get it passed, we're not just going to be like, well, we're done here, right? So like in Michigan, I just started following their organization, which is called Voters Not Politicians, very similar. And they got on the ballot, they got sued, they survived that, and now they're working on implementation, and that is, getting it passed is one hurdle, but getting it in place. And honestly, the hardest point will be this first one, because it's new and people are resistant. Come 2031 in 10 years, well, it's just the way we do it. We did it last, it's fine, and we'll get on down the road, so yeah.